Kyle McNulty, and you're listening to Secure Ventures, the show that follows cutting-edge founders in the cybersecurity space to understand their plights, glories, and revolutionary products. With me in this episode is Diana Kelley. Now, I normally write my own blurbs about my guests, but as I was reading Diana's LinkedIn description, I felt I had to pull some of it in verbatim because of how much experience there is to cover. So here goes. Diana is the Chief Information Security Officer for Protect AI. She also serves on the boards of Women in Cybersecurity, the Executive Women's Forum, InfoSec World, CyberFuture Foundation, TechTarget Security Editorial, and DevNet AI/ML. Diana was Cybersecurity Field CTO for Microsoft, Global Executive Security Advisor at IBM Security, GM at Symantec, VP at Burton Group, which is now Gartner, a manager at KPMG, CTO and co-founder of SecurityCurve, and Chief vCISO at SaltCybersecurity. So safe to say she has been around the block in the cybersecurity ecosystem. In the episode, we talk about her involvement with all these different groups and how that has changed over time, plus how and why she arrived at Protect AI. She also talks about the Protect AI product strategy and how their different products play into their broader vision for AI security. Diana, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, happy to be here, Kyle.
So you are maybe one of the most involved people in the security space that I've spoken with, at least in terms of number of different organizations that you've been working with, volunteering with, etc. And can you tell me, this seems like a more recent kick, kind of all in all, over the last 4 or 5 years really was when you ramped it up in your career, even though you've been in security for a few decades now. What was it that maybe inspired some of this additional involvement? How have you found yourself getting more involved with some of these different groups?
Yeah, so I've gotten more involved in two different aspects. One is around AI and ML, and one is around the nonprofit community. And both of those were driven from getting to a point in my career when it was really time to take stock and understand that I needed to give back. I mean, I've been incredibly fortunate to have a security career. I've been doing this since the late 80s, early 90s, very long time. And I had gotten to a point in my career where I realized it's my turn to help others. I was so lucky to have people help me find the ladder, help me put my hands on the ladder. That I was like, it's my job now to help others. So that's what motivated a lot of this. And why into AI ML? It's because I started to get really interested in it far back when I was at IBM. And what some folks might not remember is that IBM had an AI that beat Jeopardy. Some of us think of didn't AI start with ChatGPT in November 2022? But don't forget that, that Watson beat Jeopardy. Well, I think it was, a decade ago. Or close to a decade ago. So I got really interested. We were training Watson for cyber at IBM at the time that I was there. And I was very curious, wanted to know how the team was doing it, got involved to understand what the technology was. And then as I got more into AI and ML, I started to look for opportunities again to go out and be part of the community that's going to shape or shift how we address the security issues. Because I realized pretty quickly there could be a whole lot if we don't take some action here. So that, for example, is why I'm on the DevNet AIML advisory board to try and help to shape and improve how things are working in the industry overall. And then the nonprofit work is because nonprofits are doing huge amounts of important work in trying to help others be better. And of course, since I know cybersecurity, that was where I realized I could do the most. So for example, I'm on the board of vCISO, which is Women in Cybersecurity. And there were about the recruitment retention of women in cyber. So doing whatever I can to help just improve outcomes for people who want to join cyber. I'm on the board of the Executive Women's Forum, and I also co-chair the conference there. And again, it's just to help people get into cyber, stay in cyber, because there's two really hard cliffs in cyber, and both of those organizations are trying with different ways for different. And I think they're both really valuable. That's why I'm a part of both of them. But there are two sort of big cliffs. One is, how do I get in? And it can be incredibly hard to get in, and it breaks my heart because sometimes I'll get overwhelmed on LinkedIn with people saying, "Help me get into this field." And I hear these stories of I submitted 500 resumes, 1,000 resumes, nobody's even responding. I have this certification, that certification. What else can I do? So helping people get over that first bump of those 1 or 2 first jobs is really important. And both those organizations in different ways really help with that. And then the other one is once you're in the job, cybersecurity can be extraordinarily stressful and time consuming. And a lot of people do burn out. So how do we keep people in the field and not lose them? Because once you're in the field and you're trained, we don't want to lose you. We need as many smart brains as we can get in this work.
What is your number one recommendation when someone comes to you and says, how do I break into cybersecurity?
Well, my first question, actually, if they say, how do I break in? Often my first question is, what do you want to do in cyber? Because, and I know that you're sure like, yeah, but that's actually, it's such a deep question. If you're a lawyer, you could be a cyber privacy lawyer, or you could do something like what Edna Conway did, where she stopped practicing law and became the chief security officer for supply chain at Cisco. And she brought her giant legal brain into doing that work. But now she was doing something that was not a legal job. It was but it was very deeply important for cybersecurity. So what you want to do in cyber, one of my favorite people in cyber is an incredibly talented graphical artist. Not really a security expert at all, other than what she learns as we give her crazy stuff to do. But she can turn, when I worked with her, it was at IBM, when I worked with her, she would turn all of these really difficult concepts that it was very hard for us to explain to others into these beautiful visuals that could be consumed very easily. So that's what do you want to do? And then there's also this job, you can be deep technical, you can sit at the keyboard all day, hunting the bad guys, going through code. And that is really important work. You can also be someone who doesn't want to get deep hands on keyboard, but wants to sit in the C-suite or have talks to the executive, right? Sales is critical here. There are so many jobs in cyber that what somebody wants to do is the first thing that's going to matter. Because the advice I would give somebody who's like, well, what I really want to do is be the head of sales at the cybersecurity company, I'm going to give them very different advice than what I would give somebody who's like, I want to be a threat hunter. I want to be a malware researcher. And I just want to go and like rip code apart and find vulnerabilities. It's like, okay, so those would be, so it's first, what do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? And then from there, I can help to guide them a little bit better on which path in cyber that they want to go to. But every different one, that sounds like vague, it depends, but every different one, always one thing that's common in all of them, network. Find the people that you can work with, network, especially when it comes to getting jobs, because jobs these days, the number of people get a job by submitting a resume cold into an ATS portal, an applicant tracking system. The rate of people that get hired that way versus the rate of people that get hired through some kind of networking, whether it's they get an opportunity to conference, to go meet with a recruiter, or if they know somebody who knows somebody that's hiring. But it's networking and being in the right place and meeting the right people matters for everybody trying to get it.
Yeah, I think it's a fair assessment. Like you said, a bit of an it depends answer, but I don't think that makes it invalid. I think it depends is often probably the right answer. And if you're trying to approach everything with the same tactics, regardless of the position that you're actually looking at, then you're missing some of the nuance in terms of the differences in what those folks are looking for. Yeah. So I think that's a very fair answer. So you talked about the Women in Cybersecurity group, and there's a whole lot of these different affinity groups that are popping up these days, right? You're a member of a few of them, and not just member, but actually leading some of these different groups. What do you think a successful affinity group does well compared to some of the ones that maybe haven't seen the same amount of traction or had the same kind of outcomes that they're looking for?
I think it's really about engagement. There can be sometimes this a little bit of a, that old movie Field of Dreams, a little bit of like, if we build it, they'll come. Sometimes you'll see organizations just, we're going to create a Discord or a Slack, and then everybody's going to get in, and it doesn't take off like, the Taylor Swift subreddit. It takes off like crickets and goes nowhere, and it's really empty. And if there aren't people there, people then start to. So I think it's about being able to create meaningful engagement, whether it's through local chapters, different activities, trainings. Some volunteer bodies are also certification bodies. So, certification that someone can take and then use, and that might help them get a job. But finding some way to bring people in and keep them engaged is really, really important. And what will keep people engaged is when they're getting something out of it, but they're also able to give back, which sometimes we forget, I think, as we, especially when you're trying to create a new group where you're trying, it's like, well, what can we give people? Part of what you give people is, it's truly the greatest gift, is to give, not to receive. So it's helping to engage them and, giving them training and opportunities for networking, but also helping to encourage them to participate and go out, whether it's, to be a speaker for the first time. That's, but helping them also give back, or to lead moderate a small group or a panel, helping them to give back and give engagement, create a class, for example. So that too, engagement in how do we draw them in, but also how do we give people opportunities to give back.
Taking a step back, we've kind of covered this broad background in terms of experiences that you've had. But thinking about the number of organizations that you're involved in today and the amount of time that must actually take up, combined with the kind of chief responsibility of a CISO in a startup in one of these kind of vendor companies, is really being a chief evangelist in a lot of ways, right? Obviously, there's more that comes with that as well. But yeah. I'm curious to hear your thoughts in terms of how much your day-to-day has really changed across these last couple of organizations that you've been involved with, as opposed to these different leaders at the various companies that are getting you on board saying, hey, you're doing so much great work in the community. We want you to continue doing that and have a lot of that same focus, but now you're doing it as a part of our brand. And again, obviously there's other requirements that are going to come in with that, but what is your perspective in terms of what that balance looks like given all those other commitments?
Yeah, I remember very early in my career, I was interviewing for a job and I was trying to explain how I like to work. And the person who was interviewing me said, you like to keep a lot of irons in the fire. And I mean, I'm 22 at this point, it's like you like to, and I was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. But I do. I'm that kind of a person. I really like to have a lot of different things that I do, which it doesn't mean that you can't short anything. The most important thing is if you're going to do a lot of different things, you have to be really good at time management and understanding which is going to take the priority. Like, for example, yes, I'm the CISO at Protect AI, which means the most important thing to me in my corporate life is that my job as the CISO is protecting the data and the people and the business. That's it. That's my number one, and everything else. And if I can't be doing that, if I don't have enough time to do that, something else has to drop, because that's not negotiable. And then getting that in place, now that's solid. What is the other time that I can give? And then I just try and balance out, because I have had to, you see, like you looked at my LinkedIn, there were things that I've stopped doing. And some of the things that I've had to stop doing have been absolutely heartbreaking, because I really loved doing them, but you have to be able to do what you've signed up for and give it the time. So I think that's the most important thing for people to think about, is just balance. What's your number one priority? Do you have the time for that? And then how much extra time there may be out there and to get things done. And if you're at a company that, for example, wants to have someone who's CISOing and doing thought leadership and going out and doing public speaking, then how do you frame that job in a way that's going to be able to make that possible? Right.
Yeah, makes sense. Obviously a lot to balance there, and I'm sure despite the time management, given the number of commitments you have, I'm sure you're still working long hours and having to flex that. And it sounds like you really enjoy the whole community and being involved in this, right? So I'm sure in a lot of ways it doesn't really feel like work. I'm sure given the amount of time in the community now, a lot of these people are your friends. All these different events that you're doing are just exciting and enjoyable to be part of.
That's such a great point. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, that is most of my friends are in, except for the ones that I had before I started working that I still have, all my other friends are in cyber. My spouse is also a CISO. So, yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of, risk discussion that just, because we met because I was doing consulting at KPMG and went down to do a big project for Merrill Lynch where he was working. So, yeah. I mean, it really does. It just because it's for us, it's our world. We love it. This is our place. It's our home. It's cybersecurity.
I think the big four consulting firms need like some sort of mascot. You know how when
Wouldn't that be great?
colleges, when you see someone who goes to the same college, you say like, "Oh, go Cats," or like "Go Dogs," or "Go whatever it is," right?
Go Eagles.
I think,
I say that all the time. Yeah, I'm
there
from
you go.
BC. Went to BC, and we're the Eagles. So yeah, it's like every time somebody's like BC, I'm like, go Eagles. I'm not even a sports
Right.
person. That's
Right,
about as much as
exactly.
I know about. Other than that, this is also taking everybody back. But I had a class with Doug Flutie, who was a Heisman Trophy winner. At one point, he was a very, very well known football player. And yeah, I actually had a class, and I sat next to him, and I thought he was super nice, really, really sweet person. But I didn't know he was Doug Flutie until I thought he was just Doug. Until the day of the final, when people were bringing the Sports Illustrated, he was on the cover of to have him sign it, and I was like, oh, that he's very humble. I can tell you that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, and I'm a KPMG alumni myself, right? So when you said that, I was like, oh, I need like some little moniker to just be able to throw in really quickly.
What would you make the KPMG mascot, though? Like, what do you think would be? I feel
that
like
one I have no idea. You could just do something like I know Michigan already has claimed "Go Blue," but like that seems like something that's innocuous enough that it could be associated with a corporate brand. You could probably do better than that as well, but given like the color scheme and everything.
I know. I was
we'll
thinking that.
workshop
I started thinking sky and because the white blue, it's sort of clouds, and the sky, their logo. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Then they're locked into that logo big time, but they probably already are in a lot of ways.
That logo's been around for a long time.
Let's keep moving forward here. So we've talked about all these different organizations that you've been involved with, and we've kind of teed up the transition over to Protect AI. How did you first get connected with the Protect AI team, and what was it that convinced you to jump on board there?
Yeah, so it was actually at RSA last year, and a colleague of mine at a large technology company who works in partnerships and business development had apparently said to Protect AI, I think you guys probably are you thinking about a CISO? And if you are, I know somebody who would be absolutely perfect. And then the CEO, Ian, emailed me and asked if I wanted to talk. Did make the connection between the person we both knew. I checked with the person we both knew, right? Good security person. I'm like, did you really get my email? Yes. Okay. And then I looked at their website, and I was blown away, because a lot of the AI companies are out there saying, magical, sparkly, perfect. Well, everything's going to be solved. Press this magic AI button and everything is now fixed for you. And Protect AI was talking about something called MLSecOps, and saying that we have to start thinking about building security into the machine learning operations lifecycle. And I was like, yes, because I had done so much work in way back. It wasn't even DevSecOps at the time. It was just SDL, Secure Development Lifecycle, or SSDLC, the Secure Software Development Lifecycle. So I had done a lot of work there when I was a research analyst at Burton Group. I had worked with large companies to help them implement security within their software development lifecycle. So this was really, really mattered to me. When I started at IBM, I was the strategist for the application security team. So it really, I got this. I was like, oh yeah, we had to do this with app. And they're talking about doing this with machine learning. So it wasn't this, fancy magical stuff. It was very clear that they technically were incredibly deep in the space and approaching it in a way that made a ton of sense to me. And then I read the backgrounds of the founders of the company, all of them with very deep hands-on experience in machine learning and AI, at large companies like Oracle and AWS. And I was like, oh my gosh. So by the time I started talking to Protect AI, I was like pretty much on board, because I was like, I really love the approach. It's very, very much needed. And then I started talking to the founders, Ian Swanson and D. I'm not going to say his name. He goes by D, because so if anybody looks him up, he's got a very long name, and he uses D because a lot of people butcher his name. I'm not going to butcher it. And then Badar Ahmed are the three founders of the company. And yeah, I met with each of them, and it went from who are they to a week later. I really hope that I get to work with these people, because they're amazing.
Let's start by talking a little bit more about just the state of MLSecOps AI security, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the Protect AI product. But I'm curious to hear your perspective. I'm going to leave this intentionally broad here. Thinking about the the adoption and kind of lack of adoption as well that's currently in place in terms of these different AI security tools. A lot of financial services institutions are maybe starting to have a little bit of allocated budget in terms of defending some AI capabilities and applying some AI security measures. The average company is certainly still not there yet. Now, I think it's fair to say that as more companies adopt AI, more companies are going to have to leverage AI security tools. But what would be the kind of next level of analysis from your perspective once you start factoring in that maybe a lot of these companies aren't going to have to develop their own models in-house as some of these foundation models get more and more impressive, so they're going to be using them as opposed to like developing their own pipelines for like engineering and creating MLSecOps pipelines.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's not necessarily, even if you download a foundation model from a Hugging Face, you still have to get the data, clean the data, train the model, tune the model. So even if you're taking something that's open source, how you actually run it and train it is going to now be something that's part of a life cycle, of an operations life cycle. So it does need to be, whether people are completely buying it off the shelf or implementing it, from an open source model, you still have to believe. Yeah. Can
I push back for just a second here? I'm not disagreeing with you at all. Yeah. First of all, the piece that I would add in, because again, this is something that I'm constantly trying to think about here as well. But if you're taking something from Hugging Face and then making modifications to it, absolutely, then you have like a different kind of field of risk that comes along with that.
Exactly.
What about in the case where you're buying like an organization's model that they've already kind of developed for you? So maybe a good example of this would be like Reality Defender, right? Very big in the deepfake space right now. We just talked to them on the podcast. They're basically providing you like a trained model as a capability that you then have to use. So if you're employing that capability that's been handled by another company, you don't have the same like repository checks that you have to do for Hugging Face. You want to make sure that Reality Defender has the appropriate checks in place, that they're not exposing any new risk into your organization, the same kind of like vendor risk management practices that you have in place. But what's your perspective once you factor in that angle as well, and what you need to do to take care of that risk angle?
Yeah, so you make a good point with that. There's also things like the GitHub Copilot, for example, which is a code assistant, right? And then you get into procurement. So there's whether you're operationally, and whether you built the model, you downloaded a model, trained it, right? There's, if you're buying something and using it as it was trained by that entity, then you really get into procurement. And actually, that it's kind of an interesting, or say a good time. Dr. Carrie Miller was she just put out a framework on how to procure AI safely. She was working on a group that did that, working with a group that did that. And I think that's what we need to do, is we need to weave the security of AI and ML into the procurement process. Because right now our procurement teams, just like our dev teams, don't necessarily know how to secure ML, or they don't have the same, developer doesn't have the same understanding of machine learning an ML engineer will generally. In procurement, our procurement teams how do they know how to assess AI and ML? And is it something that they should buy? So we need to create procedures within procurement to be able to vet, is this, how do I understand if this is a vendor I want to do business, and how do I understand what's coming out of their system, and do I trust it? And also policy around how to interact with those systems. If it's a public tool that you're using, I was mentioning Code Assist, for example. If you're using one of the code assistants, your company needs to do a risk model, a threat model on, is it okay for us to use it, and what would be acceptable to use it? So, what acceptable, not acceptable. Say you take all of the code for your critical application and you just put it in the code assistant and say, optimize it. That may be something that your company says, I don't want to take that risk. That's too much of a risk. I've also been asked a lot about, when the code comes out of one of these tools, how do I know it's secure? Well, you have to bring it into your CI/CD pipeline and act like it's your code. You have to test it. You have to do, whether you do manual code reviews, SAST, DAST, you have to bring it in and test it the same way you would any other code. So Yeah, we got to bring it into what we build. We got to certainly weave it into what we buy. And then one thing that we really haven't touched on is that a lot of organizations need to make sure that they understand what they already have. And by that, again, a lot of people kind of thought that AI just got created magically in November of 2022. This is not, it changed how we're using it. I'm not trying to underplay how critical that inflection point was, but the reality is that before that, there were still many, many large organizations that had thousands of machine learning models already running, in line. And some of them at some companies were a little bit shadow IT in the sense that they may not have been fully managed or inventoried within companies and completely in the security program. So we also have to, that's another really, really critical thing, is making sure that we have started to add security. And we have security for the pipelines that were already there at a lot of companies that are still there.
It's funny you keep bringing up the history of AI and how it is much more dated than the last couple of years. The example I keep thinking about, I love chess, is Deep Blue back in what was like the late 90s and early 2000s, right? When that was first being used against humans. I think it was early 2000s when it first actually won, but was still beating strong humans in the late 90s. So
exactly. And if you want to go way, way back to the 1960s, Joseph Wiesenbaum at MIT had ELIZA. And ELIZA was so convincing for some people and so shocking. It was basically a chatbot that was supposed to help you. It was supposed to be like a psychologist, psychiatrist kind of thing. So it did a lot of like, how does that make you feel? But there were people that interacted with ELIZA in the 1960s that were like, it's alive.
Yeah. Okay. So thinking about this kind of market piece that we just touched on here, I want to wrap this up with just asking about some of your assumptions as you think about the larger market space, because what we just talked about is there's some of these different angles, right? There's the companies that are building models. Yeah. There's the companies that are maybe leveraging open source models and then tuning them. Yep. And then there's the companies that might just be buying off the shelf products that are leveraging models within those.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you think about the kind of longer term landscape, and I mean, it directly relates to the kind of capturable market for Protect AI, how do you see these companies falling into those three buckets? Like if you had to make some sort of classification in terms of the percent, I'm putting you on the spot here, so you can just make up like rough estimates, but the percentage of companies that would fall into each of those buckets.
I think that a lot of companies fall into all those buckets, actually. I mean,
totally.
Especially at larger companies, there's a lot of actually building your own model from the ground up is probably the least likely thing that you're going to see. Synopsys had research out a few months ago. It said that 80% of the analytics and AI tooling that's in use right now is open source, which is, I mean, that's a pretty impressive number. So there's a lot of use. Why would we reinvent the wheel? So these foundation models are really very much driving what's going on. So there's a lot of training there. So you see a lot there. And then buying and using these systems. I mean, the usage has exploded. And I think almost every company is using some form of this newer modern Gen AI somehow, whether they're helping to write press releases or, emails or anything that all the way to actually doing things like refining their code or refining their policies.
Yeah. I personally agree with both of those things wholeheartedly. That there's going to be probably a small fraction of companies that are developing their own models in-house. Pretty much every company is going to be leveraging some sort of tool that employs AI. And then the question mark for me is that kind of middle group. How many companies are going to be downloading or using open source models and then tuning them for their own cases? And I think the parallel to use there is maybe software development more generally, right? Where like when software development was kind of first coming about, it was like, oh yeah, everyone's going to buy software tools, but not everyone's going to have a software team. But now you look at all the major companies around the globe and everyone has a dedicated software team. So there's probably a good parallel to be drawn in terms of what that arc is going to look like longer term as well.
I agree. Go
for it.
I mean, but the most important thing is for organizations to start to get a handle on the fact that whether they're buying or procuring or downloading and training, they need to get a handle on the security of it. So weaving security into the procurement lifecycle and absolutely, ML SecOps, machine learning, security operations, bring them all together and making sure that they can see, know, and manage what they've got running.
Let's use this as a pivot over to the Protect AI products. There's like 5 different products that are listed on the website. Plus there's the Hunter threat community or AI security community that exists. And just thinking about all these different products and kind of approaches within the company, how do you think about prioritizing across each of these different use cases? And how much of this is kind of saying, hey, the AI security MLSecOps space is still so young. We don't really know which area is going to have the most commercial traction longer term. And so we want to have some sort of product established in each kind of pillar that we're seeing. So that way, as one of them starts gaining traction, you have the early signal and you can ramp up prioritization and development efforts there.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Is that we're looking at a platform-based approach to the MLSecOps lifecycle, which means that you've got to have different tooling at different points across that lifecycle. So the core tools that we have out right now are Guardian, which is a way to scan your models that are going to be used within your environment to make sure that there's nothing malicious or untowards in there. And we also have Radar, which helps you understand, do that inventory, that auditability of what's running in your organization, what data was used to train it, what version of the model you had, who trained it, those kinds of things. So those are the 2 core pieces that we've got in the platform. And as a small company, you focus on where you think you can provide the most impact and the most value. We also have some really great open source tools. So there's an open source version of Guardian called Model Scan that anyone can just go out right now and download on GitHub, give us stars, hopefully. We also have NB Defense. And we have recently onboarded a group called Layer, which is LLM security. So that, in use, people can have additional security of what's going into and out of that tool. So what we're trying to do is really create a platform. And as to your point, as a startup, we're looking at those opportunities of where we can make the most impact for people based on what they need now and that signal that you're talking about. We also have the Hunter platform, HUNTR, which is an open source. It's a platform for vulnerability, bug bounty on open source related to the use of AI and ML, so within the supply chain. And that's actually helped us a lot too. So why would we do that? It's like, well, that's not, it's not an actual product in MLSecOps. It's a vulnerability, and a bug bounty platform. But the vulnerabilities that are being discovered really help to understand. And there was not a comprehensive understanding of what this entire security life cycle looks like or what this environment looks like. So Hunter has really helped us not only to get people to start thinking about this more, which was part of the work, but also to help us understand where those problems might be so that we can help to find that signal a little bit early and figure out how we can better help customers secure things. And then we do have this free MLSecOps community. It's a Slack group. Come and join it. We are all trying to make the world a better place for machine learning and security professionals. So, it's really about a community of exchanging ideas. And also that's where we do share out. That's where we talk about, we have our open source tools like NB Defense, a Model Scan, and Rebuff that people can download.
Based on what you described previously, I'm sure there's a high level of engagement in that MLSecOps community. I'm sure you're taking care of that piece. So thinking about this kind of platform portfolio, you mentioned 3 tools plus the Hunter community that are effectively open source, right? Or kind of open to the public. How does that factor into your kind of overarching strategy in terms of making some of these open source rather than having a platform of commercial products? Just what's the kind of perspective there? Obviously it ties in well with your community focused background.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a big part of it, is that when anything starts getting started, you have to go out and get the community to get on board until people are adopting, until people understand this is a problem. Still people start using tools. There's an education lift. So getting more people involved, any great movement starts with people having wonderful discussions and starting to work together and creating new and better things. So that's where MLSecOps comes in. That's where, the open source comes in. But then open source, as you know, right, it's free. So at some point, there's only so much time or effort that you can put into a free tool related specifically to enterprise or scalable level solution set. So this is a really common pattern that happens in security a lot, which is where there's a tool that anybody can use in open source, but then large enterprises start saying, I want this feature, I want that feature, I want this other thing, right? And that's going to be a whole lot of development work. So the tool stays open and you let people use that tool and it gets updated. But those extra enterprise, those costly enterprise features, those go put into a commercial product. So that's really what you can see with ML Scan to Guardian is that, that you got this wonderful tool for free in ML Scan, but if you want to have some of those enterprise level features, that's where the commercial comes in.
When I first learned about open core tools, I was like, who would start paying thousands of dollars just so they could have support from a company? And then over time have learned that, no, that absolutely makes a huge difference when it comes to enterprise. So
it does.
Yeah,
it does. Yeah.
Completely makes sense in terms of that overarching model. Now, I want to take us back because you mentioned this value of the hunter community. And I know Ian talked about this a lot as well whenever he's talking publicly or with investors as well in terms of just the kind of earned insights that come from managing that community. A big part of that is, again, understanding some of these different vulnerabilities that exist out there and what these potential exploits might look like. Now, let me segue this with the kind of theoretical research that has been done on model-based attacks today, whether that's poisoning or injection. Have you seen specific examples of this in the wild? And just to add a little bit more context, the way I think about AI security a little bit today is maybe like supply chain security back in 2019, where we're still kind of like waiting for that really big public attack that waiting's maybe the wrong term, but that public attack.
Pre-Log4j SolarWinds kind of.
Yeah, exactly. SolarWinds is the example that I was using there.
Yeah.
So before that, people aren't spending as much time focusing on it, but they know it might be important and something that they should keep an eye on. After you have that super public attack, everyone says, okay, board is coming to us and saying, what are we doing to protect against things like this in the future? Executive team saying, what are we doing to protect against things like this in the future? And then all of a sudden, investment in that space skyrockets. So tying this all back together here, thinking about the timing of the AI market today and this theoretical research that's been done, the bug bounty program that's in place with Hunter, are there real world examples where you're actually starting to see this stuff come together and kind of precursors to these bigger breaches?
That's one of the things that we're trying to do. When we talk to customers, we talk about how can we prevent a Log4j moment in the ML world. And if you take a look at once a month, we put out a vulnerability report from Protect AI, and we talk about the vulnerabilities that we found. We always do this very responsibly. So we work with the maintainers of repositories. We make sure that there's a patch or at least a workaround before we put it into our vulnerability report. But once a month, we talk about the different vulns that we found out there and that have been reported by the wonderful researchers in the Hunter community. And has there been a Log4j? Not yet, but certainly there have been areas for improvement that have been found through that. Some of these things have been, there have been like local file includes, remote code execution issues. So they're non-trivial, but luckily, at least in machine learning, there hasn't been a Log4j moment yet. But I really hope for the work that we're doing at Protect AI, other organizations are doing, that we won't have a Log4j moment. Let's hope. I think if we all get together and really work hard and keep looking for the problems before they spread, that we can do a pretty good job of shoring up resilience in this space.
That's a much more positive spin on things, and I like that for sure. Okay, awesome. Well, Diana, again, really appreciate the time. Super fascinating to hear more of your perspective on this space, and so much in your career and background that we didn't get a chance to cover here. So really appreciate you bearing with me and kind of skipping over some of that too, just given how long we could talk about it.
Yeah, no, thank you. It was great to be here.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can write to me at kyle@secureventures.io. I'm Kyle McNulty, and you've been listening to Secure Ventures.